Hi, I'm Cecilia. Welcome to the second day of the 12 days of Christmas. For more of me, check out my Instagram and also my blog to know more of who I am and what I stand for. Yesterday, I introduced this segment or this series called the 12 days of Christmas, and I told you why I decided to have this series. Firstly, is for us to renew our mind and refresh our mind on the birth of Jesus Christ and the stories that we have been told from childhood, going through Sunday school, and also for us to understand fully why the birth of Jesus Christ, and also to help us reflect on the birth of Jesus Christ. So on today's 12 days of Christmas, the second day, we are going to talk about the offspring that was promised, because the birth of Jesus did not just come out of the blue, or God did not just decide after some time that okay, let Jesus Christ be born, but it was a promise that was made since the beginning of time. And if you look through the salvation story, you realize that it was before even mankind was born. But now we're going to look at from Genesis chapter 3, when the offspring was promised to Eve and to Adam, after now they had sinned against God and God was going to kick them out of the Garden of Eden, and also the hope that he gave them concerning now what had happened. We see it from Genesis chapter 3 verse 15 with the offspring that God promised the woman that her offspring will crush the head of the serpent and the serpent will bruise the heel of that offspring who was to come. So we see the promise of the offspring that people were waiting for, the savior, the person who will bring about salvation, from this condemnation that they now faced, them being kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and the harsh reality that now came before them, with them having to work and sweat and life having to be hard for them to eat, for them to rest. And we are told that from that book of Genesis chapter 3 that all hope was not lost. God promised them, the son or the offspring who was to come and save them from this calamity that had befallen them. And throughout history, we looked at Noah and the birth of Noah. If you also are joined in with the study of Genesis, we have looked at the story of Noah, of why he was named Noah, because his father thought that Noah now will be the salvation or the savior that was promised, but then we see that he was not. But also he was a chosen one because he saved his family, from the judgment of the flood that was coming. But then this offspring was being awaited for, and people looked forward to this offspring from generation to generation. We look at now Abraham and his relationship with God when he was the chosen one, called out of his family to go and live in a foreign land, and also he was promised offspring, who in this offspring that he was to have, all the nations of the earth would be blessed, And it was not just Isaac, it did not just rest on Isaac, but it was someone who was to come in a way so that every family on earth, not just the chosen nation, but every other family was to be blessed. And that the forefathers paid very much attention to this offspring, or to this promise of God, of the Savior who was to come. That's why the inheritance or the blessings did not pass on from Abraham to his other son Ishmael, but it had to be specific, Isaac. And Isaac did not pass it to every other of his son. He had Jacob and Esau, but Esau did not receive that specific blessing, but it was passed on to Jacob, and then Jacob passed it on to his son Judah, and it went on like that. So each and every generation passed on that scepter, that promise, that special blessing that was to be given to the firstborn of each and every family throughout the line of Abraham, so that to keep that promise alive, to remind them that there is this promise that God made, that offspring that God had told them who would come and save them, and it was passed on from one male to the other of the next generation that was coming, so that the scepter would keep going throughout the generation. And then we look at now David, him and his kingdom being established by God, and God chose David apart other than Saul, who came before him, but he chose David. And then towards the middle end of David's life, he was promised an offspring, or a child, or his son, who will come up after him, and he will establish his kingdom forever. We see that in the book of 2 Samuel chapter 7 verse 16, of the offspring or the kingdom that God will establish in the house of David that will last forever. We see that also being accomplished shortly with the rise of his son Solomon as king, but to know that after Solomon the kingdom was separated into two. So he did not especially go down the road that probably he would have thought it would be, but it was another offspring, someone special who will be able to establish that kingdom forever. And with the promise, he was glad to hear that promise. David was glad, and he waited on that day, and he believed in that promise that his kingdom will be established forever and ever. And it goes on to Solomon. Then Solomon passes his kingdom to his son, but they separate. But throughout the kings of Judah, that promise was being given from one generation to another. And we go and see in the exile of the people of Israel to Babylon, and the destruction of the northern kingdom, and all of that, but the hope still remained. God used his prophets to remind the Israelites of the promise of the offspring of the Savior that was to come. The Messiah that the Israelites continually looked forward to see. And we see in the book of Jeremiah, God reminding the people when they were still in exile that a Savior was going to come and the kingdom of Israel was going to be restored. So they were constantly looking forward to the coming Messiah, the Savior that will come and save them. So it was an offspring that was promised since Genesis chapter 3 all the way to the Jewish people back in the days of Jesus when he was born. So they had that hope, they had that promise, they had that prophecy that there was a Messiah who was to come, there was a Savior who was to come. And also we look at Micah chapter 5, where we are told of the son of the king who was to be born in Bethlehem, as now the scribes and the Pharisees told King Herod of the promise that of the Messiah who was to come. Later on, we'll look at it later on. But then we see that this prophecy of the offspring, the promise of the offspring was something that was there from the beginning, that the Jewish people were looking forward to. The Israelites were hoping for that Savior who will come and rescue them, from their bondage, especially in Babylon and the many foreign nations that were attacking them and were oppressing them. And also now to the modern time when Jesus was born, to now the rule of the Romans. They really didn't like it, and that's why they were looking forward to that coming Messiah who will liberate them from the oppression of the Romans and establish a kingdom, the Jewish kingdom that they look forward to, the reinstatement of the kingdom of David that was promised. They also knew, because they had the Old Testament with them, that God had promised David an everlasting kingdom. So they were waiting for that Messiah who will reunite all Jewish nation as one and lead them as David ruled them as David ruled the kingdom back then. So they were looking forward to this promising Messiah. And with the coming of Christmas, with the coming of the announcement of the birth of Jesus, we look at now the promise being fulfilled, the Messiah who was foretold from before, now being told that he is coming. The new king of the Jew is coming. And they were looking forward to it, and some had forgotten it, as we'll see later on. But now, the offspring that was promised, the offspring that was much awaited for, the kingdom that was to be reunited, the kingdom that was to be established forever and ever, the son of David that was to come and rule the world forever and ever, the kingdom of Israel was lost long before, but now has to be reestablished again. This new kingdom and this offspring was to bring all about this to fruition has now been announced and now is coming back to earth. That announcement was a joyful announcement because it brought about hope, and that it brought about the revelation that the promises of God, he has not forgotten them. The prophecies that were told them that were told to them by the prophets of old, they were coming to fruition, And now that is the announcement of the offspring, or the promise of the offspring that was to come. That offspring was Jesus Christ. With the promise to Abraham, now this child who was to unite the whole world, that through him all the nations of the world will be blessed. It is culminated in the person of Jesus Christ, because through Jesus Christ all the families of the world are being blessed. Now it is neither Jew or Greek or Gentile or male or female, but all of us through the person of Jesus Christ are being blessed, And the promise that was made to Abraham is now trickle down all the way to every family here on earth. So Jesus Christ is the offspring that was promised from of old, and with his birth, with Christmas now, Now that promise that God had made, that had lasted the Israelites through centuries, now comes to life. Jesus Christ now is being born. That promise is now being seen in the daylight now. And hope has been restored, and the kingdom will be established, and the kingdom will last forever and ever. That brings us to the end of the day 2 of the 12 days of Christmas, as we look into the events and everything that happened to us and the birth of Jesus Christ. And at least we have seen a history of that Jesus Christ, that he is not just something that happened to come, but it was someone who was promised. But he is someone who was promised to bring hope to the world, who was promised that through him every family of the earth will be blessed. For more of me, remember to check out my Instagram and also my blog to know more of who I am and what I stand for. So thank you for joining me today. Until we see each other tomorrow for the third day of the 12 days of Christmas. Goodbye and God bless you.